All right, so in a world where so many of us are looking for financial tools that are more transparent, more, well, ethical, we're going to dive into a really powerful concept. It's from Islamic finance, and you can think of it as a blueprint for leasing. It's called Ijarah, and it's all built around fairness and tangible, real-world assets. So let's get into how it actually works.
So let's start with the big question, right? The central challenge. In the conventional system we're all used to, interest is pretty much the main tool for financing anything. But what if you wanted to build a system without it? I mean, how do you let someone use a car or a house or some heavy machinery without just giving them an interest-based loan? This is the exact problem that Ijarah is designed to solve.
And here's the really elegant answer. Ijarah. You know, at its core, it's a lease. Simple as that. It's a contract where someone gets to use a specific, permissible asset for a set period of time. And in exchange, they pay a rent that is crystal clear from the get-go. And notice the emphasis there on known and permissible. This isn't about lending money. It's about leasing a real, actual, usable thing.
Okay, to really get how this works, I want you to think of an Ijarah contract like a really well-engineered building. It has to stand on 5 essential pillars. And if even one of those pillars is weak or missing, the whole thing just isn't valid. It's all about building on a solid foundation. And here they are, the big 5. First, you need a lessor, that's the owner of the asset. Then you need a lessee, that's the person who's going to use it. Of course, you need the leased asset itself, and it has to be clearly identified. And finally, you need a defined term for how long the lease lasts and a clearly stated rent. Every single one of these has to be spelled out and agreed upon. No ambiguity, no we'll figure it out later, it all has to be there.
Now, on top of those 5 pillars, the system adds a series of conditions. And look, these aren't meant to be complicated or restrictive. Think of them as built-in safeguards or guardrails that are there to guarantee total transparency and protect everybody involved.
First things first, let's talk about the asset itself. It has to be real and specific. We're talking a serial number on a machine, a specific address for a property. It also has to be in usable condition, and its purpose has to be permissible, or what's known as halal. And here's a really critical point. The lessor, the owner, has to actually own it. You can't lease out something you don't legally own or have the right to lease. This is what keeps the whole transaction tied to the real economy.
Okay, now this is where things get really interesting. The rent. Ijarah actually gives you flexibility, but it demands absolute clarity. You can have a simple fixed rent, say $500 a month, nice and easy, or you can have a variable rent. But, and this is a big but, it can't just be random. It has to be linked to a clear, public benchmark with specific dates for when the rent can be repriced and a transparent formula for how it's all recalculated. The key is, the lessee always knows the rules of the game. No surprises.
So, what happens when something breaks? Who's on the hook? This table lays it out perfectly. The lessor, as the actual owner, is responsible for major maintenance, the kind of stuff related to the fundamental ownership of the asset. Think a new roof on the building or a new engine for the car. The lessee, on the other hand, is responsible for the day-to-day operational upkeep that comes from just using the thing, like changing the oil or swapping out a light bulb. This split really reinforces who truly owns the asset.
And following that exact same logic, insurance, or its Islamic equivalent, which is called takaful, is also the owner's responsibility. It just makes sense, right? The lessor is the one who owns the asset, so they're the one with the insurable interest. Now, the cost of that insurance can be factored into the rent, but the ultimate responsibility to get it insured, that falls squarely on the owner.
And this is a huge ethical distinction. What if a payment is late? Well, a penalty might be charged to discourage that from happening again. But here's the kicker. That money can never be treated as profit for the owner or their investors. Instead, it has to be donated to charity. The whole point is to enforce discipline, not to make money off of someone's financial difficulty. So, now that we've walked through what a good, solid contract looks like, let's flip it around and talk about the red flags. Because knowing the rules also means you can spot when they're being broken. Think of this as your field guide to sniffing out a bad deal.
Okay, first and foremost, if the contract is vague about what you're actually leasing, that is a massive red flag. Remember, Ijarah is all about a specific, tangible asset. If you see a contract for a delivery truck instead of the 2023 Ford Transit with this specific VIN, you're on shaky ground. The whole point is to be tied to a real-world asset.
Red flag number 2. Watch out for any contract that tries to dump all the major ownership-level maintenance costs onto the person leasing the item. That's a huge problem because it basically undermines the whole principle of ownership. I mean, if the lessee is responsible for everything, it starts to look a lot less like a lease and a whole lot more like a loan with a clever disguise.
We just talked about this, but it is so important it's worth saying again. If a financial institution is taking those lead fees and booking them as their own income or profit, it is breaking a core ethical rule of Ijarah. It's one of the clearest signs you can get that the contract is not compliant, because it's just mimicking how interest works.
And finally, be really wary of any fuzziness around the rent. It doesn't matter if it's fixed or variable. The way it's calculated, the timing, any benchmarks, all of that has to be crystal clear from day one. If the lessor can just change the rent whenever they feel like it, that completely violates the whole principle of transparency and fairness.
All right, so let's zoom out. We've gone through the pillars, the safeguards, and the red flags to avoid. What does all of this actually mean in the context of our modern, super complex financial world?
When you boil it all down, it comes to this. Ijarah is a blueprint for a different way of doing finance. It's a model where every single transaction is anchored to a real, productive asset. It demands transparency, it demands clear responsibilities, and it operates within an ethical framework that really sets it apart from conventional, debt-based financing. So it's not just some set of ancient rules. It's a genuine, stable, asset-backed alternative for today.
And that leaves us with a pretty fascinating question to think about, doesn't it? In a global economy that can sometimes feel so abstract, so disconnected from the real world, could these ancient principles of transparency, of being backed by real assets, of shared responsibility, could they actually offer a path toward a more stable and a more transparent financial future for all of us?